I'd like to start, if it's okay, with your reaction as you've watched what's happened over the last couple of days with these strikes in Iran over the weekend. Your first thought as you saw this happen?
Yeah, Heidi, I think I was like a lot of Americans. I was a little bit torn, and I wasn't surprised. I don't think any of us were terribly surprised. I mean, we've been building up forces in the region for several months now, but I still think, like a lot of Americans, I was a little taken back by it. Part of that is, I'm a former Air Force guy, right? I'm a former military officer, and so I know how dangerous this is going to be. I knew we'd put American lives in danger, so I tried to be thoughtful about it. And the other thing too is you look at the last 20 years and you look at Iraq and Afghanistan and Libya and a number of other examples. You think, have we learned lessons from these things? And if we learned lessons from these experiences, are we gonna apply those lessons now? So I really did try to think about this, but I came to a conclusion it was the right thing to do, and honestly, it was probably inevitable. I mean, Iran has been the largest state sponsor of terrorism for, almost as long as I've been alive. And I think it was almost inevitable that we come into conflict with them at some point. And I think it was just better now to get it over with, to, force that conflict while they were weak, as we know that they are now because of the conflict in Gaza and the previous attack on their nuclear facilities. And I just think, it's hard. I think it was hard for the president, but I think it was the right thing to do.
When you say it was hard for the president, I think a lot of people are looking at how he campaigned with being America first and no new wars. Is that a promise you can actually keep as a president, or does that change depending on what conflicts are going on in the world?
Well, it's exactly what you said. You can't make that promise and know that things and events could compel you to change that. And the president surely knew that as well. And I think that when he said no new wars, that was one of the things that a lot of people responded to. I mean, as I said earlier, Iraq, Afghanistan, all the other things, but, the Americans are cautious and a little bit wary of those types of engagements. But on the other hand, I think events did compel him here. I think he saw an opportunity that he felt like he needed to take. And this is, I think, one of the main points. I've talked with so many people over the weekend, and they're like, well, we're going to be there for months or for years. Is it going to be another quagmire? And I can promise you it will not be. The president's not going to deploy 200,000 troops into Iran like we did in Iraq and Afghanistan. He has no intention of having a large land force, and it's not going to take much time. I think the progress is happening pretty quickly. So I don't think we're looking at another Iraq, but there's no question the president was reluctant to do it because he campaigned and he's believed for a long time, no new wars. They're expensive and they take American blood and treasure. But again, it seems like events just compelled him to do something.
The president also said today that he wouldn't rule out boots on the ground, which I think is a concern for people. Is that because he honestly believes it may have to happen, or is the president, you can't rule anything out and take cards off the table when you are at war?
Well, I think it's a little bit of both, and for sure, if you're a wartime president, the last thing you want to say is to signal to your enemy and those who are supporting your enemy. The last thing you want to do is say, well, we're not going to do this. If you push this into a box, one thing we're never going to do is put boots on the ground or deploy American soldiers there. So, of course, he has to say that. I can tell you with a really, really high degree of confidence that it will be the last thing in the world the president wants to do, and I don't think it'll happen. I just don't think the events will compel us to do that. This is very, very different than Iraq. It's very different than Afghanistan. And Heidi, if I could go back to my original point about, we look at those things and did we learn lessons from them? You bet we did. And I think one of the lessons that you're going to see applied here was that we're just not going to deploy American soldiers into a foreign country like that without a really, really compelling argument for doing that. And I just don't see that developing here.
Unfortunately, as we're just a couple of days into this, we know that 6 U.S. service members have lost their lives. The president's saying there could possibly be more. I think this is the hardest thing for people to stomach at home as they're watching this, our young service members who are putting their lives on their line and their families are waiting at home for word.
Yeah, I mean, and there's no way you can't sugarcoat that, right? It is just one of the heartbreaks of war. And again, as a former military person myself, as someone who's had, more than a dozen members of my family, my brothers, and then our nephews who have served or are serving now, I'm very, very sensitive to that. You know, I think the same condolences and heartfelt, you know, best wishes have to go out not only to those service members that we lost recently, but to the hundreds or even thousands that Iranian leadership is responsible for killing over the last several years, over the last, you know, decade or so. You know, they have killed more Americans than just those that we lost in the last, you know, 48 hours here. And, you know, that's hard for all of those families, and we want to remember them as well.
You have experience on multiple fronts that most of us don't have, with serving in Congress and the War Powers Act that people talk about. Also, your experience flying yourself. I want to talk with your experience flying. You were in the Air Force for 14 years. Tell me a little bit about the readiness and what these pilots are thinking right now, because this is really that's being fought in the air right now with many of our pilots.
It is. I mean, this is an air campaign. It will almost be entirely an air campaign. By the way, there's this, you know, pretty well-known saying that says you can't win a war by the air power alone. It's just not true. I mean, we have Kosovo, for example. I think this is going to be an example of that. I mean, this is a great challenge for pilots. One thing you have to know is that they're going into a really high-threat environment. This isn't like flying over the Bahamas. This is a very adept military. They've got massive number of ballistic and surface-to-air missiles. Russia, some of the best that China and Russia can sell them, which is, I think, demonstrated by the fact that we've lost a couple of people, that, you know, war is unpredictable and dangerous. So the pilots are tense, they're anxious, they feel like, okay, this is why I trained, this is why I prepared, I'm ready to do it. I was watching some videos today of the B-1s taking off, you know, the airplane that I used to fly. And, you know, those guys hit the afterburners at night on takeoff in these massive blue flames. And, you know, it gives me a bit of a chill thinking about what those pilots and air crew are going through. But once again, God bless them, and I hope they're not doing it for more than a few weeks.
One thing I want to mention before we move on, I don't know if you've seen any of the videos today. None of them have been confirmed, but there were 3 different jets that were shot down by friendly fire by Kuwait today. We've seen videos of some of those pilots, or reportedly they're pilots on the ground, with Kuwaitis finding them on the ground, some of them being slightly hostile so they knew they were Americans, others being friendly up front. But what struck me as I was looking at each of these pilots, where they had just been shot down, they opened their parachutes, they landed on Kuwaiti soil, didn't know what was going to happen, but they all seemed very calm, cool, collected, and put together even after all that.
Yeah. Well, of course, that's your training, and that's the discipline of being a military officer and a pilot. You don't panic. The other thing is they knew where they were. They knew they were coming down on Kuwaiti soil, that they weren't coming down inside Iran. That makes a big difference, obviously. You know, it was friendly fire, which is not something you ever like to see. And unfortunately, you know, the battle space is just very, very complicated. You've got not dozens, you've got hundreds of aircraft and hundreds of missiles all flying in the same space at the same time. And to identify friend from foe can sometimes be a huge challenge.
Scary to think.
And I think that's a problem with them, is they were on their way back home. They were, you know, returning to base and felt like they could, you know, exhale a little bit and take a little bit of a break. And then, you know, they had this friendly fire incident. So if they'd been, I think, more wired and thinking they were still in a combat environment, they might not have been shot down. But under the circumstances, I just don't think they were quite prepared for it. But you're right. They land. They know where they are. They know the Kuwaiti people are supportive and going to help them. And you know, thankfully, of course, we're really glad that was the case.
An intense job for sure. When you were in Congress, you covered a lot of the area of Hill Air Force Base. You talked to families there. Do you still have a sense of what's happening in the Hill Air Force Base community, and if maybe they're serving in Iran right now, or at least on standby to head that direction?
Yeah, you know, some of them certainly are. They are. Others will be on alert, and they'll be ready to deploy if necessary. You know, I still work closely with our military and national security forces. I maintain my security clearance and do, you know, quite a lot of work in this area still. I can tell you that Hill Air Force Base has a reputation as one of the finest bases in the Air Force, and I'm not just saying that because I'm a homeboy. I mean, it's really true. The fighter pilots there, the others, including the air refueling wing, very, very great. I mean, just have such a great reputation. I'm sure they're anxious to serve and engage and do whatever the president commands them to do, and their families as well. I mean, their families are, Hill Air Force has one of the, or Hill Air Force Base has one of the strongest support systems from the community and supporting their families. It's just a beautiful thing.
We'd love to see that here in Utah. I want to talk a little bit about your time in Congress, that security clearance. There's a lot of talk after something like this happens, whether it's President Trump or a president of another party, about whether or not they need the permission of Congress to go to war. The War Powers Act. I was listening to Secretary Rubio before I met up with you, and he was saying that there's no law that specifically requires a president to get permission from Congress, whether they're Republican or Democrat. They're 100% falling into compliance. They said, Rubio said that they notified the Gang of Eight before it happened, and within the 48 hours, they notified Congress. Do you believe the president has followed what he needs to with getting the permission of Congress, or should Congress be in on the decision to go to war like this?
There's just no question. The president followed all of the protocols, all of the things that were required of him. The Constitution makes it clear that he is the chief executive. He is the commander of the military forces. He has the ability to respond, and of course he would have to. Can you imagine if we had to go to Congress and debate before we took action like this, or before we took action after 9/11, or before we took action after the invasion of Pearl Harbor? So that's true. He is the chief executive, but it is still true that our founding fathers knew that the Congress would be probably more reluctant to commit soldiers than the executive might be, and so they did give them some authority for actually declaring war. And that's where you have this bit of an overlap between the War Powers Act, where the president has the ability to go in and respond immediately, but within 90 days, the Congress needs to support him. We did that after 9/11 with the authorization for the use of military force. We've done it a dozen times since then. And but I don't think, Heidi, I don't think in this situation it's going to be necessary, because I'd be just really surprised if this action extended beyond the 90-day period. I just don't think it will, and I'm really confident the president doesn't think it will either at this point.
So that would be the technical definition when Congress acts after 90 days, that it's a full-blown war?
Yep, that's right.
Anything else you'd want people to know, looking at your background and experience, whether it be in Congress or flying yourself, that you'd want people to know about as they watch what plays out?
No, I think you hit it. I think it was good.
Perfect.